Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation on cucumber beetle IPM. My name is Ellie Andrews and I serve Sonoma, Marin and Napa Counties as the UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor. So thank you so much everyone who attended and contributed to the cucumber beetle focus groups in 2024. We had 3 of these focus groups, 2 of them were in English and 1 was in Spanish. And they were really well attended by a lot of commercial growers as well as agricultural professionals, a handful of UC Cooperative Extension cucumber beetle experts, and backyard growers. And also, thank you to all the growers who've asked me about cucumber beetles outside of those groups too. I've received a ton of questions about this pest last year and, as recently as yesterday. So they're a really big challenge in our area for diversified vegetable farmers and flower farmers. So your input and questions are the basis for this presentation. I thought it would be easiest to organize everything here in this recording, and I'm going to use a ton of photos to walk you through who cucumber beetles are and what they do, type of damage they cause, and what you can do about it. So here's a brief outline. I'm going to go over the background of this pest, how you identify cucumber beetles, their host plants, a description of their damage in the field, and then we'll get into their life cycle so you can really understand the biology of this insect pest. We'll talk about different timing and conditions and those kinds of environmental considerations that you should know about. And then we'll get into their mobility and their range before we open up this really big topic of integrated pest management. So I'll briefly go over what IPM is, and then we'll talk through IPM strategies for this pest specifically with some really great on-farm examples from local farmers in the North Bay area who very kindly agreed to let me use their farms and their strategies as examples of IPM. And then I'll briefly touch on some areas where we need some more future research. Okay, so for some background for cucumber beetles, they feed on and damage cucurbits and many, many other types of crops as well. Their larvae in the soil feed on the roots of plants, and the adults feed on leaves, blossoms, and fruit. They're really pervasive. They're actually native to North America. And last year, in 2024, cucumber beetles caused really high levels of damage in annual crop systems in the North Bay area across the board. So the first step is identification. So we really want to make sure we know who's who out there on your farm. So this can be kind of confusing sometimes. There's a lot of different bugs out there, and sometimes it's hard to know which ones are beneficial, which ones are pests. So I'm going to walk you through how to identify cucumber beetles. And these are just some examples of bugs you might confuse for cucumber beetles. So just take a minute and see if you can identify which ones are actually cucumber beetles. Okay, and here are the answers. So on the far left, we have a yellow ladybug or ladybird beetle. We also have some orangey red ones on the top right corner. So these are not cucumber beetles. They kind of look like them, especially the yellow ladybug, but the cucumber beetles are actually in the center here, these center 3. So ladybugs or lady beetles are shown here on the left-hand side. They're a lot more round, and they don't have those long antennae, whereas cucumber beetles here on the right have long, dark antennae. They have this black head and a greenish or yellowish thorax. And then for spotted cucumber beetles, they have these 12 black spots. So just take a second and see how these 2 insects are really different. Okay, so I'm going to cover 3 types of cucumber beetles briefly here, just so you know who's out there. So the adult western spotted cucumber beetle is on the left. The adult western striped cucumber beetle is right next to it here in the center. And then we have the adult banded cucumber beetle on the far right. So they look a little different. They share some characteristics. But this adult banded cucumber beetle on the far right, it's only really found in Southern California. And we're up here in the North Bay area where I'm based. So for the sake of meeting the needs of my farmers in my region, I'm really just going to focus in on these 2 cucumber beetles on the left-hand side, the adult western spotted cucumber beetle and western striped. And of these two, spotted cucumber beetle was much more reported by North Bay vegetable growers and flower farmers last year. So I'm going to focus in a little bit more on those spotted one, but they both share a lot of characteristics and a lot of similarities. There are a couple small differences in behavior and preferences, but overall, there's a lot of overlap between these two cucumber beetles. So they're both about a 1/4 inch long in size. They come in spots or stripes. So as you can see on the left, the spotted is greenish yellow in the background, and then it has these black spots. And then the striped has alternating black and yellow stripes. So their eggs are yellow or orange in color. As you can see here in this photo, they're oval shaped. They lay clusters on or under coarse soil. Spotted cucumber beetles lay anywhere from 200 to 300 eggs per female, whereas striped cucumber beetles can lay up to 15,000 eggs per female, which is a lot of eggs. The larvae of both species are yellowish white in color. As you can see here, they're about 1/2 inch long, kind of slender and worm-like. They have 3 pairs of short legs, and they have this darker head or tip of their abdomen. So western spotted cucumber beetle larvae have a wide host range, including grasses, legumes, cucurbits, of course, but also corn, tomatoes, lettuce, a lot of other vegetables, flowers, coyote brush, weeds, etc. So really diverse host range, which makes it pretty challenging. The western striped cucumber beetle primarily feed on cucurbits because they prefer them, but they can sometimes be found in other crops too. So the larvae look like this here, as you can see in these photos. They feed on plant roots. They burrow into young plant stems, causing wilt or death. And then the adults feed on and destroy flowers, leaves, and fruits. And as you can see in this photo, it shows it really nicely. They can really skeletonize leaves, which causes severe damage. And just anecdotally, some growers I've talked to report that cucumber beetles prefer lighter colored foliage and flowers like white dahlias or like pale varieties of lettuce. So that's something to bear in mind, just anecdotally from farmers. And then here's some more photos of their damage. I think it's helpful to see a couple different examples of this here. We see the skeletonization of leaves. This is kind of how it shows up in the field. And then here's what their damage can look like on flowers. So, you can see close up, we've got a spotted cucumber beetle and a skeletonized flower leaves in kind of a similar fashion. They also can gouge fruit, especially smooth melons and the shaded sides of fruit that have contact with the soil. An important note here is that they kind of prefer the shady side of fruit where it's cooler, maybe a little more moist, it's a little sheltered. So they like those environmental conditions. So just keep an eye out and bear that in mind when you're looking for them out in the field and looking for their damage. Here are some more photos of the damage they cause. We can see them kind of like burrowing in and feeding on stems and fruit here. And unfortunately, cucumber beetles can transmit plant diseases. So this is really important to bear in mind. Not only are they causing all that damage I just covered, but they also can carry diseases from one plant to another. So on the left here, we've got bacterial wilt on pumpkin. So it really, lives up to its name. You can see the wilty leaves kind of drooping. That's a sign that you might have bacterial wilt happening. And then on the right-hand side, we have leaf mottling that indicates squash mosaic virus on zucchini here. So that's more of like a mottling or stippling. You see those patches of discoloration. So these are both just visual symptoms of potential plant diseases. So I just want you to know that these diseases can be carried by this insect pest. So it's good to know what these symptoms look like. So plant damage often starts as a sort of yellowing leaves. Whereas nitrogen deficiency might be kind of uniformly pale yellow, here you can kind of start to see it's in between leaf veins in this photo. So that's one way to sort of tell, oh, maybe, this might not be a nitrogen thing, it might be something else. But it does start as this leaf yellowing. And then over time, this can spread to like larger patches across the field. These are photos from pumpkins that I visited, and they were just loaded with cucumber beetles. So now we're going to get into the life cycle because it's really important to understand how an insect pest operates and what it likes, what it doesn't like, how it proliferates in order to effectively control it. So to start, cucumber beetles overwinter as unmated adults in weedy areas, plant debris, nearby wooded areas, and fence areas. Then adults lay eggs at the base of plants or in soil cracks. And those eggs typically hatch in about 5 to 10 days, more or less. From there, larvae become active in the early spring when temperatures are around 55 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Hatching larvae burrow into the ground to find roots and start feeding as soon as they hatch. Striped cucumber beetle larvae only feed on roots of cucurbits, whereas spotted larvae feed on many different types of host plant roots. And so larvae feed and develop for about 2 to 6 weeks in the soil. Then cucumber beetle larvae pupate for about 4 to 7 days, as you can see here in this photo. And then they emerge as adult beetles that attack the above ground parts of the plant. Adults can live for about 60 days or more, and typically they're about 3 generations per year. Each life cycle lasts about 4 to 6 weeks. So you can see how this cycle could continue over time and build up really high populations. Activity can spike every 30 to 60 days, depending on temperatures. So I wanted to include this brief slide just on a really nice visualization from Entomology Today, which is brought to you by the Entomological Society of America. So these are spotted cucumber beetle observations on iNaturalist on a monthly basis, and I just pulled out January, April, and August here as examples. If you want, you can actually go to their website and see all of the months and how this graphic changes over time. But this just shows the monthly distribution of iNaturalist research grade sightings of spotted cucumber beetle, illustrated in like a animation. Like I mentioned, you can go to their website and see that animation. And then we have this kind of dotted line here showing a division between subspecies. But the important thing here is I just want you to see, okay, in January, there actually are quite a bit of sightings. So they're active, year round here. You might see them any time of year. But then things really pick up in the summer, late spring, and especially in the summer as temperatures rise. So cucumber beetles really like moisture and cool temperatures. So they like to lurk inside flower petals, on the underside of leaves where it's shady. So crops that provide shade under leaf cover, like melons, for instance, during hot weather, they create these conditions that cucumber beetles really like, especially during and after irrigation. And this is a really nice example. You can't tell right now, but in this photo, this cucumber beetle was trying to run away from me. It was actually really fast. It looks like it's still, but it was running really quickly away from me to try to get to the shady side of the leaf and hide from me. But they really do like the cooler, shadier, more moist conditions. So tunneling cucumber beetle larvae need the soil to be moist in order to survive, thrive, and move around. So on a hot, dry day, a field that was recently irrigated with good shade from the crop canopy could attract cucumber beetles into the field because that's a beneficial environment for them. Later in the summer, after sustained high temperatures, though, a lot of growers last year especially reported to me that they saw much lower cucumber beetle populations, probably due to the heat. So, this just shows they kind of fluctuate, their population levels fluctuate, and it's largely influenced by temperature. A really important note here is that cucumber beetles have a lot of range. They are strong flyers, they have a broad host range, they like a lot of different types of plants, and they're really mobile, the adult ones. So cucumber beetles fly really readily and they migrate into crop areas from surrounding cultivated fields and uncultivated areas. So it's really important to just be aware of your surroundings, both on your farm, but also maybe neighbor farms or neighbor areas, because cucumber beetles can migrate in from nearby, whether it's hayfields or grassy areas. especially when they're harvested or cut. So I heard a lot from farmers about, oh, well, our neighbor cut a hayfield and now we have tons of cucumber beetles, So as much as you can, talk to your neighbors and try to understand when they're going to harvest. I also heard about a farmer who weed whacked on one area of their farm and then had a huge cucumber beetle outbreak right after they did that. So just be aware that they can migrate, especially after you cut grassy areas. So this male aggregation pheromone that they release can lead to rapid infestations as well. So that's something to bear in mind. There's a lot of different factors at play here, explaining why you might see these spikes in populations. Some growers find cucumber beetles tend to be groggy and slower in the morning, though, and so they prefer to scout or look for cucumber beetles then. So time of day might be interesting to look at, this year as you're making observations. Maybe they're a little bit slower in the morning because temperatures are a little bit cooler. That might be a good time to go look for them because they're a little bit less mobile. So as I'm sure you can see, cucumber beetles can be really, really challenging for a lot of different growers. They cause a lot of damage, like severe damage. They're highly mobile across the landscapes, especially the spotted cucumber beetles. Infestations can happen really quickly. They can be hard to predict, yet once they're there, they can be pretty persistent. They reproduce several generations each year, like I showed, and their ecology and behavior are relatively understudied, especially in our California context. We really need some more research on cucumber beetles. So what can help with all of this now that I've outlined the problem in a lot of detail? What can you do about it? So I'm going to get into IPM in a moment, which is basically a toolbox approach, saying, okay, what are all of the different strategies or tools in your toolbox that you can use and kind of tailor or pick and choose for your unique farm situation? So that's what you can do at the farm scale, within your control on your own farm. And then at a regional scale, I really want to encourage everyone to have open conversations with their neighbors, other farmers nearby you, technical assistance providers in your region. This pest is everywhere. It is really pervasive. A lot of farmers brought it up, maybe not 100% of farmers, but many, many farmers. So the likelihood is there are other farmers struggling with this pest too. And there's technical assistance providers like me and a lot of other really awesome organizations as well, and UC Cooperative Extension folks working on it. So please talk to us about this. Tell us what's happening, what's working or not working for you in terms of different strategies, what you need help with. Maybe tried a strategy, but you're not really sure if it worked. You want help kind of fine-tuning things. And then definitely also talk about what tools and resources you really need to reduce damage. So you have a lot of people here to support. Please reach out to me about this pest, but also don't hesitate to chat with really anyone about it, even if it's just your neighbor who has a hayfield, for instance. Okay, so getting into Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. So I'm sure many of you have heard of IPM, but just in case, I'm going to define it briefly here. So IPM, this is straight from the UC IPM website. It is a process you can use to solve pest problems while minimizing risks to people and the environment. So IPM can be used to manage all kinds of different pests anywhere. It can be in agricultural or urban or natural areas, large scale, small scale, organic, conventional, it doesn't matter. IPM is a really big picture, holistic approach that anyone can use and kind of tailor to your unique situation. So it's this big picture systems approach to pest management. It's not prescriptive at all. It's a way to think through problems and decide what strategies make sense for you. It's going to look a little bit different for different farmers. But I really want to emphasize that IPM is for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're conventional, regenerative, organic, scale, commercial, non-commercial, etc. So I think there might be some myths out there that IPM is just for conventional large-scale ag, but I just want to take a moment and say that's not true. This is an approach that anyone can use. And that's because it's a toolbox approach. So you get to choose a combination of strategies that make sense for your context. It's going to look different depending on your goals and your constraints and opportunities on your farm. But traditionally, IPM is often shown as this kind of triangle where you start at the base here with identification and really understanding the pest, which is what I just covered for cucumber beetles. And then you can explore all kinds of different strategies like cultural controls, sanitation, physical or mechanical methods, biological control, and then chemical is shown at the top here just to symbolize, you're not going to do this first. You can wait, you don't have to use chemical options, but if you do, it's really important to try combining multiple other strategies before you get to chemical products. So for cucumber beetles, your toolbox looks something like this. So after doing a lot of digging around for this particular pest, these are all of the different strategies that I could find that have some amount of research behind them. So science-based options here that we know can provide some level of control for cucumber beetles. I know this list is long. I'm going to read through it briefly because this is essentially the rest of my presentation here. I'm going to go into each of these in more detail. So at the top, one option, not saying you have to do this, but one option that can provide some level of control is light tillage that kills eggs and larvae in the soil. Another option is exclusion via floating row covers. You can use transplants to give your crops a bit of a head start. You can also delay planting. So if you know or if you think that cucumber beetle populations are going to spike, you can wait until after that spike kind of passes to plant. Mulch can help discourage egg laying. Drip irrigation can help reduce humidity or moisture. Crop selection can help, thinking through which crops are most susceptible or maybe a little more tolerant. Scouting and monitoring is really, really important. This is probably one of the most important strategies, is just going out and looking for cucumber beetles in a proactive, systematic way, and then monitoring and keeping track of what you're seeing. And hand in hand with that one is thresholds. So setting a threshold that works for you and your farm, keeping records of all of this. Another big one is removing plant debris and weeds as much as reasonably possible, since we know they really like diverse weed species, but they also can kind of hide in plant debris. Perimeter trap cropping is another strategy. Lures and baits can help you with scouting and monitoring. Promoting natural predators can provide some level of control, but a little bit lower levels. I wouldn't rely too heavily on natural predators, but it's great if you can promote them. Insect vacuums are an option, especially on a smaller area. Kale and clay applications. It's basically clay suspended in water that gums up their antenna and kind of disorients them. So it's a barrier spray. There's some growers in California who say diatomaceous earth can be helpful. We don't have a ton of research on it, just a little bit. That indicates maybe it could help to some degree. And then we have several different organic insecticide and biologically based insecticide products that I'm going to outline in a lot more detail. Okay, so I know that's a lot, and I just want to emphasize you do not have to do all of these things. I think that would be impossible. So please just choose the strategies that are appropriate for your context and your goals. Okay, so now I'm going to go through each of those. So for farms that do use tillage, and I know there are a lot of no-till farms here, so I just want to acknowledge that. But for farms that do use tillage or soil disturbance, light tillage in the spring or fall can kill larvae in the soil. It can reduce sites as well on plant debris for overwintering cucumber beetles. So this is one option. Another option is exclusion with floating row covers. As you can see here in this photo, they create a physical barrier around your crops where it's practical. Again, so some of these strategies like this one might be more practical on a smaller scale. But this can be really effective. It prevents adult cucumber beetles from landing on your plants. Just be sure you want to bear in mind you want to remove your row cover to allow insect pollination and weeding as needed. So just think about that timing wise when you'd want to make sure you remove row cover as needed. So I'm going to start using some anecdotes from farmers who've done a lot of work on cucumber beetles. So this one's from Kelly Brown at Do Right Flower Farm, shared with permission. So she said, when you're using netting, just be sure that the structure that the netting is on doesn't allow sagging onto the crops to avoid burning the leaves and flowers. So I think that's a helpful note just to throw in here. And here's another photo of what this can look like. You can be really strategic. I think this photo is nice because it shows, okay, these farmers decided to use this right here at this time. So this is from Sonia Perotti at Coyote Family Farm near Santa Rosa. So thanks, Sonia, for the photos. Here's another photo from them. And so to exclude cucumber beetles, this farmer, Sonia Perotti, Coyote Family Farm, like I mentioned, they use Protect Net, which is a specific type of floating row cover because it's reusable and it doesn't trap heat. So they keep this netting on things like salad mix and basil because cucumber beetles cause so much damage during peak times. And she knows that this makes sense for high dollar value per area crops. So again, this is strategic. And I'm going to start mentioning different products throughout this presentation, but they're just examples. So I'm not endorsing any products whatsoever. But I do think that it really helps to give specific examples of products, just so you know what's out there. But just bear in mind there are many, many other types of products too that are worth exploring. So just make sure you do your research and explore different products before you make a choice. So another strategy to consider is transplants and timing. So transplants can help give plants a head start if you're going to plant early. On the other hand, you can think about delayed planting timing. So maybe you might want to plant susceptible crops relatively late to help avoid high spring populations of adult cucumber beetles if they emerge and move away from your field. So if you think you have a lot on site, you think they're going to be, maybe emerging in the spring, you can kind of play with timing and experiment and see if you're able to avoid some damage that way. Another strategy is mulch. So this can help discourage egg laying around plants. It creates this barrier to migrating larvae. You can think about, plastic or organic mulches or both with drip irrigation. So this sort of combining these things can help deter egg laying near plant stems. And so thinking through like mulching and strategic irrigation can help reduce contact between fruit and moist soil, reducing cucumber beetle feeding on fruits. Like I mentioned, they kind of like to go feed on the side of the fruit that's in contact with the soil. And here's just a nice example in this photo of like a straw mulch, plastic mulch combination at Yagi Sisters Farm. So as I kind of mentioned, drip irrigation can help reduce soil moisture and humidity around the plant. So cucumber beetles really love moisture, cool environments. Compared to overhead watering, drip irrigation can help make the soil plant environment less hospitable by reducing moisture and humidity. And so here's just a really nice, lovely photo of drip lines at Paul's Produce. So you can kind of see what drip irrigation can look like in annual crop systems. You can also think about irrigation timing, so limiting water application near harvest, especially like for melons or other cucumber fruits, can help reduce risk of fruit injury. But broadly, you can kind of experiment and see, how you might want to adjust irrigation timing to make that environment a little bit less welcoming for cucumber beetles. And you can think about crop selection. So you can think about planting more tolerant crops where pressure is high or where you think it's probably going to be really high based on what you've seen in previous years. Some varieties are going to be less susceptible to or desirable by cucumber beetles compared to others. There's a really nice ATRA article on cucumber beetles that actually has a really long list. This is just a screenshot, but if you scroll down, you can see more examples. So this is table 1 from that ATRA article on cucumber beetles, and it ranks cucurbits by cucumber beetle feeding preference, in case that's helpful. So if possible, you could allow time periods where there are no cucumber beetle host crops present in a field that you think is going to have really high populations. Realize that's not always possible or practical, but if it is, you can consider kind of like rotating or not planting susceptible crops where you think it's going to be a big problem. And this is a strategy I really want to emphasize, scouting and monitoring. So the goal with this is to detect pest populations and make informed and timely IPM decisions. So once you know the pest identification, you say, okay, I'm really confident this is cucumber beetles. It's super important to scout and monitor for them and any other insect pests for that matter. So we want to keep track of population levels and their locations over time. And you can do this several different ways. You can use yellow sticky traps or ribbons or tape. Cucumber beetles are attracted to the color yellow. A lot of different insects actually are. So this is just a visual sticky trap. They see yellow, they're attracted to it, and they get stuck to the trap. You could also just look at plants. That's a little harder because, like I mentioned earlier, they're really mobile. They might run away or fly away. It might be kind of hard to get a good sense of it. But as you're doing things out in the field, you might just kind of notice them on plants anyway. And you can also use net sweeps as well. So several different options. I would say at least putting out some yellow sticky traps would be a great idea. And you can start scouting and monitoring after transplanting or when seedlings start to emerge. So really early, just want to emphasize the earlier you can start this, the better. You can keep an eye on the edges of fields where cucumber beetles tend to concentrate at first. So, maybe there's areas you think they're going to be early on. So you can be kind of strategic about where you put traps. Generally, though, it's good practice to space them evenly wherever you decide to put them. So you want to monitor with yellow sticky traps, especially if high populations are expected on your farm. You can write the date that you installed the trap actually on the trap to keep track of that. Like I mentioned, cucumber beetles are attracted to that color yellow, so that's what's going to bring them there. And some traps come with a pheromone lure as well. So that's just something to consider when you're looking at different product options. So scouting just refers to actively going out and looking. So you want to inspect your traps or young plants 2 or 3 times per week early in the season. And you can set this up, location wise or, delegate it to one specific person so you know who's going to do this. There are different ways to make this logistically and like practically pretty easy. Hopefully not too much of a time sink, but super important to be systematic about it. So on plants, you're going to look for larvae on dying seedlings, as well as adults at the base of stems, hiding inside flowers, like I mentioned, or on the shady leaf undersides, on fruit undersides, especially fruit that's touching soil directly, on chewed leaves, petals, and fruit. So I wanted to include this here just as a nice example of how, trap counts might change over time. So this is from a really great CAPCA article by UC Cooperative Extension Advisors, Cucumber Beetle Management in Fresh Market Melons. But it just shows, how much this can change over time and the importance of keeping an eye on things. So the yellow lines here are total beetles per trap for yellow cards. Then you can also see they use sweeps and then visual counts. So I just want to show here, yellow sticky traps, those little cards are really, really helpful because it'll give you a better picture of what's going on. Doesn't hurt to do more than one thing, but if you're just going to choose one, I'd go with the yellow sticky cards. So then you want to make sure you have a threshold. So as I'm sure many of you have experienced, cucumber beetles show up in waves and there might be one or two out there on your traps and then all of a sudden your traps are just covered with beetles. That's kind of how a lot of farmers have talked about it to me. So you want to set an action threshold that's appropriate for your operation. So this might be a specific number of beetles per area, whether it's a trap or per plant, and that number prompts you to take a specific IPM action. So an important thing to ask yourself is how much damage is too much for a specific crop you're growing. And it might depend, some crops are fresh market, some might get processed. So just think about what threshold makes sense for your specific crops and set your threshold accordingly. And I really want to emphasize early control is essential, regardless of what you actually choose to do. Being aware of populations early in the season and then doing something proactive and systematic about it early in the season is really critical for control. And I'd really encourage you to think about what kind of record keeping strategies make sense for you. Everyone's different. I'm a visual person, but maybe you want to use maps, maybe you want to just sketch things out or have a nice little spreadsheet. It can be super simple, but you want to somehow track populations over time and damage. Trap counts each year might look different. Maybe one year is really bad. Last year, I heard so much about a lot of cucumber beetle damage, but each year might shift a little bit. But recording things and keeping track of these population shifts will help you identify trends at your site. So, maybe pressure is worse one year than another, but you notice, oh, when temperatures reach this certain level, that's when I start to see them. So, it could be something as simple as a Excel sheet that you could put into a little graph if you wanted to. If, it could also just be, notes in a little notebook. So another important thing to do is remove habitat for cucumber beetles, however possible. So you want to reduce the habitat that they like. So this might be crop residues in the field or debris, weeds. Of course, you want to be doing weed management anyway for a lot of reasons, but removing weeds and being on top of that can really help with cucumber beetle management. If you tilling in crop residues after harvest accelerates that residue decomposition, or you could just remove them from the field entirely. Monitoring any weedy edges of the farm, especially for their preferred plants, can be really helpful to identify pressure in advance and anticipate their movement from those plants into your field. So another strategy you could consider is trap cropping. So the goal of trap cropping is to lure and concentrate cucumber beetles where control measures like vacuuming or organic insecticides can be focused away from your main crop. So here's a nice little example. We have blue Hubbard squash as a trap crop plant at the end of a row of other main crops. And here, blue Hubbard is preferred by cucumber beetles, so it's a nice example. It doesn't have to look like this specifically. There's a lot of different ways you could set this up. But the idea is, location-wise, you might want to put this on the perimeter of your farm or other strategic places, and you might need multiple rows if pressure is like really, really high. So some options, like I mentioned, cucumber beetles love Hubbard squash. They also really love sunflowers. And that ATRA article I showed earlier for cucumber beetles has some of their top preferred crops there too, but these are just two examples. And you might want to plant these trap crops a couple weeks before your primary crop. So you want these trap crops to be ready to go before your main crop. So cucumber beetles will gravitate towards your trap crops. And here's just a nice example at the bottom right of a sunflower that's been used as a trap crop for cucumber beetles. And this photo is provided by Kelly Brown at Do Right Flower Farm. So you could experiment. Maybe some different types of crops work better for trap crops than others. But you want to be sure you have a strategy to control the beetles once they gravitate towards your trap crop. Okay, another topic to cover is lures and baits. So these intercept cucumber beetles on field borders as they move into the fields early season. You might want to position these trap baits with a highly preferred trap crop. For instance, that can enhance trap bait efficacy and reduce injury to those less preferred crops. So one example is Sidetrack CRW. It's a gustatory stimulant with no insecticidal properties of its own, actually. It just makes them feed more, and that can be mixed with insecticides in a trap bait. And there's also various pheromone lures available as well. So again, I'm mentioning products. They're just examples, not endorsements. So this topic has come up a lot. I got a lot of questions about natural predators of cucumber beetles. So Yeah, there are actually a lot of different natural enemies, a wide variety for cucumber beetles. You can create habitat that encourages predators and parasitoids of cucumber beetles on your farm. I think this is just a great thing to do in general for a lot of reasons. Whether it's hedgerows, insectaries, that kind of thing. So some examples of natural predators and parasitoids of cucumber beetles include ground beetles, soldier beetles, entomopathogenic, or also known as parasitic nematodes and fungi, hunting and web weaving spiders, parasitic tachinid flies, green lacewings, wide variety of other spiders too, and bats. But please bear in mind that natural enemies alone are rarely effective enough to reduce populations below economically damaging levels. They can provide some help, but they are highly variable and not a dependable strategy used alone. So just bear that in mind. I would not put all my eggs in one basket with this one. But there's a lot of potential. We need more research on this topic and how to optimize and encourage natural predators. But I would not rely on this strategy alone. Another topic that's come up a lot is insect vacuums. So these dislodge insects from plants. There are several different options out there. There's like large mechanized bug vacs, backpack and handheld equipment, modified leaf blowers. But generally, this practice might work best on a small scale, maybe focusing on hotspots of high cucumber beetle populations. Maybe that's in your actual crop, maybe that's in your trap crop. But this is, labor intensive and not going to work well across a large scale. So you might want to be strategic about where you focus. So I took a bit more of a deeper dive into this, and there's a really nice short blog post from Michigan State Extension called Vacuuming Pests with a Leaf Blower. And so you can modify a leaf blower to vacuum up beetles. Most leaf blowers actually have that option to serve as a vacuum and a blower. You might want to choose one that has like a larger diameter opening and tube. Some fit like a backpack, so definitely explore different options out there. Some come with a bag to collect what's vacuumed up, but if not, this article is saying that you can attach a nylon cloth or a bag to the opening of the vacuum with a strong rubber band. That's what it sounds like some entomologists do. You can empty that periodically into a bucket of soapy water. And I wanted to include this local example. So when local farmer Wendy Krupnick was the garden coordinator at Schoen Farm, she was telling me that they used a leaf blower or vacuum on vacuum mode with the exhaust modified so it would not blow down and make like a big cloud of dust. She says that we added a flexible duct secured with duct tape that made the exhaust blow directly behind the operator. We played around with what nozzle, if any, to have on the vacuum, and I think I decided on uh, no nozzle was best, as otherwise suction was too strong and damaged the plants. So that's something to bear in mind. She says we found that the best timing was around 9 a.m. when normal summer weather with fog, this was in the Forestville area, fog burning off and just starting to warm up. Earlier, the beetles were still hidden in their sleep crevices, and later they were too active flying around. So doing it every day for about a week, or maybe even less, made significant dent populations. So I just wanted to include this here. There's a lot of really nice, helpful tips in this anecdote. So thanks, Wendy, for sharing that. And this kind of reminds me earlier of how I mentioned, a lot of other farmers too have mentioned they seem to be a little bit groggy in the morning. So you could play around with timing as well as location for this practice. Another strategy is kaolin clay applications. I think this is one that we could explore a lot more. It has a lot of potential. So kaolin clay products use polarized clay mixed with water. Basically, clay suspended in water. It's a particle film barrier on crops. So you spray this on your plants, and it repels cucumber beetles by gumming up their antenna, impairing their navigation. So if you're going to do this, you want to make sure you use the proper sprayer equipment for good coverage and follow the label instructions really carefully, whatever product you choose. One example of this is a product called Surround. You want to apply this early in the season. You can apply to transplants before planting into the field, for instance, or in the field. Just bear in mind that as the plants grow, this kaolin clay will actually disappear over time. So spraying early, especially if you're concerned, you don't want any of this on your final product. You can see in this photo here, the photo's a little blurry, but it's a really nice illustration of how these new younger leaves of this kale plant are green and don't have kaolin clay because it was sprayed long enough ago that those older leaves still have residues. And I know, like, for a lot of folks who grow different types of greens and lettuce, you might be removing those older leaves anyway. So just something to bear in mind timing wise. And here's again what it can look like on squash leaves. I'll also mention briefly that kaolin clay is actually used in a lot of different crop systems as a protectant for like heat and drought stress. So just bear in mind you might actually be helping your plants withstand heat and drought stress, as well as helping repel cucumber beetles. So another thing that's come up, growers have asked me about diatomaceous earth for this pest. So for those who don't know, diatomaceous earth is powder made from sedimentary rock consisting of diatom remains. So diatoms are these hard-shelled algae that contain silica. They look really cool. Here's a photo of them at the bottom right here. They're used for a lot of different uses in agriculture. So these products dry out and kill insects on contact by absorbing oils and fats from the cuticle of their exoskeletons. So this product is abrasive. Basically, we have microscopic sharp edges that accelerate this process. They're not damaging to us or other mammals, just to insects. So we need a lot more research on this, just a big caveat, but some growers in California use this product as an early season beetle deterrent in organic production of cucurbits. Some growers in the Central Valley report success for control of cucumber beetles. It is relatively low cost, which people like a lot, and I can certainly appreciate, but typically you're probably going to have pretty low levels of control with diatomaceous earth. So I would just be careful with this product if you're going to use it. You might want to consider how you could make it more effective in combination with other strategies. So maybe it could be used together with a feeding stimulant, like I mentioned earlier, such as cucurbitacin, and an insecticide. So I could see that being more effective potentially than just relying on this diatomaceous earth alone. And just bear in mind it's going to work best if it stays dry. Okay, so here's everything we talked about so far. We've gone through a lot of different strategies, and now we're at the point of the presentation where I'm going to talk about chemical options. Again, you do not have to do any of these things. These are just options. But there are products out there that you can consider. So in integrated pest management, pesticides are only used when monitoring shows they're needed in combination with other approaches and following label instructions really carefully to ensure it works well and to minimize risks to yourself and to the environment. There are many OMRI listed options to consider out there. So just make sure you check with your particular certifier before you choose a product to make sure that it is allowable for your certifier. And some certifiers are a little different. So, whether it's CCOF, for instance, another certifier, just check with them first before you start using a new product. The crop system where you intend to use a pesticide product must be listed on the label. So always, always read the label super carefully and follow the instructions on the label for how you use it, where you use it, timing, safety. You can also see the UCCE IPM website for further resources on pesticide use and safety. So before we get into your options for cucumber beetles, I have to cover this really important topic, organic versus conventional pesticides. So when we say synthetic or conventional pesticides, we're talking about compounds that are produced by people, by us, through an industrial process. So humans, we are synthesizing synthetic conventional pesticides. And you compare that to naturally occurring pesticides, on the other hand. So these are actually derived from compounds produced in nature. So we humans did not create them. So I actually wrote a whole fact sheet on this subject back in 2018 now, back when I was at Ohio State Extension. I had a really amazing mentor there, Dr. Rose, who was my boss and also helped me write this and guided me on this. So I think this is a really, really important topic. So you want to make sure you understand pesticides in organic versus conventional crop production systems. if you want to take a deeper dive, please check out this fact sheet. So pesticides permitted in certified organic production are on this OMRI list. So this OMRI stands for the Organic Materials Review Institute. These have been approved for use in organic agriculture according to the USDA. Most are naturally occurring, not all, but most of them are. So if you want to know what's possible within certified organic production, you can look at the OMRI list. But again, you want to check with your certifier because each certifier is a little bit different. So since most vegetable and flower growers in the North Bay area, which are my clientele, they grow organically for the most part, vast majority. So my presentation is really just going to focus in on organic insecticide product options. But please be aware there are synthetic options out there for conventional growers, and those are listed on the UCCE IPM website. Okay, so our first organic insecticidal product option is beneficial nematodes. So these are also known as roundworms. They are parasitic to insect pests and they kill larvae in the soil. So here's what their life cycle looks like. We're going to start up here. We see infective juveniles enter the host. So these little wormy guys represent nematodes that are going to parasitize this cucumber beetle larvae host. So they enter the host, they release this bacteria that aids with killing the insect. So the larvae dies, nematodes begin to develop. They reproduce within the host, and then they emerge as juveniles, and then they kind of repeat this cycle over and over. And you can tell if you can find a cucumber beetle larvae or a larvae of a bug that these nematodes are going to infect, the larvae are going to turn darker in color, so a tan or brown. So you'd have to go digging to find them, but if you do see ones that are turned darker, that means that the nematodes you applied probably are doing their job. And here's what that looks like in real life. They're a little bit gross, but really important to understand how this works. If you're going to use this product or any of these products, it's important to know how this works so you can really optimize this strategy. So certain beneficial nematodes, like I mentioned, are parasitic. So here we have H. bacteriophora nematodes on the far left. This is what they look like swimming around outside of a host. Then here's what they look like once they've infected an insect pest host. So this right here is black vine weevil, just as an example. And then they get released and swim out to go find other hosts. So there are a lot of different products out there. Nematode HB is an example. Triple Threat combines multiple different types of beneficial nematodes into one product. So you can explore your options there. Again, just examples, not endorsements. And with any of these products, though, you are going to want to apply multiple times early in the season, following label instructions really carefully. So you can consider the life cycle and conditions that nematodes need as you're doing this. So we talked about the conditions that cucumber beetles like. Here on this little list, I'm going to go through conditions that nematodes need in order to do their job and help control cucumber beetle larvae. So nematodes, they need soil moisture to move through the soil and find their host. So if it's really dry, they're not going to like that. They won't be able to move around as much. So you can make sure your soil is moist at application and stays moist. Maybe you apply nematodes right after rain in this early spring or after irrigation. They become active when soil temperatures reach 42 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's below that, they're not going to be that active. If soil temperatures are above 95 degrees, they're going to stop feeding, but they probably won't totally die. If the soil freezes, they will die though, if it's for more than 3 days. And just bear in mind, they do need a pest host to attack and feed on. So certain fungi also can be used in insecticide products or myco-insecticides to kill insect pests. There are options that are allowed in organic agriculture because we're using fungi, which are naturally occurring. And here's what the life cycle looks like. These life cycle diagrams are from Cornell's website, so really awesome resources out there on how these different active ingredients work. So here, the infection process of entomopathogenic fungi is shown. This is on large to show detail. These spore structures aren't actually this big in real life, But basically, you have these sporal structures, they release spores, they infect other hosts, they release toxins and kill the larvae, and then continue to reproduce in a cycle. So here's what this looks like in real life. In this photo on the far right, we have Beauveria bassiana on insect pest host. Here it's spotted lanternfly, just as an example. So myco-insecticides are products that use fungi like Beauveria bassiana. And, there are a lot of products out there, but some examples are Mycotrol, Botanicard. For beetles, this is going to work best on young larvae. So similar to the nematodes I mentioned, you're going to want to apply these products repeatedly as needed, especially if populations are high. But again, always follow the label instructions for whatever product you use. Every product's different, so just read the directions on the label really carefully. And these myco-insecticides, especially Beauveria bassiana here, create this dense white fungal growth on insects. So that's one way to just visually take a guess at what's probably happening there. If you see something like this, it's probably Beauveria bassiana if you've applied that product. Another option for organic insecticides are products that use spinosad. So spinosad is an active ingredient. It's the ingredient that has the pest control effect that we want. So this is a natural substance made by bacteria. It's available in many different product options, different formulations. Spinosad affects the nervous system of insects and mites. Please bear in mind, though, it is highly toxic to bees, but toxicity is reduced after the product dries. So you could, if you're going to use this product, you could consider applying spinosad-based products in the evening when bees are not active, following label instructions. And here's what the bacteria looks like in the bottom photo that produces spinosad. Another organic insecticide option here is azadirachtin. So this is a compound with anti-feeding, repellent, and insecticidal properties. It acts as an insect growth regulator. It's extracted from seeds of the neem tree, as you can see here. And it's used in products like Azagard, just for instance. So if you're going to use azadirachtin, just bear in mind that it's most effective for immature insect stages. It's not going to be effective for adult cucumber beetles when you use it alone, but when you use it in a soil drench, it can kill cucumber beetle eggs and larvae. It's going to have relatively short residual activity. And if you're going to use this, you can reduce the risk of pollinators by applying it in the evening or in the early morning when pollinizers are not present. Another organic option here is pyrethrins. So pyrethrins are organic compounds extracted from chrysanthemum flowers. So these compounds affect insects' nervous systems. They're used in many different insecticidal products. I think one a lot of folks have maybe heard of or tried, it's called Pyganic, just as an example. Pyrethrins can be moderately effective for cucumber beetles. I've heard mixed reviews. I think it's really important to follow label instructions. So just make sure, before you draw any conclusions about efficacy, make sure you've used it correctly. You can always call your product supplier or just chat with them and walk them through what you did. But also bear in mind, it can be highly toxic to honeybees. It degrades in direct sunlight. If you're going to use this, make sure you reduce risk to pollinators by applying it in the evening or early morning when they're a bit less active. So as you can see, there's actually a lot of different organic insecticide options out there. And they have pros and cons, just like every other IPM strategy I've covered. They have benefits, but they have limitations or challenges too. So a lot of these products can be pretty expensive, some more than others. It can be hard to tell whether they're really making a difference because cucumber beetles are so mobile across the landscape. Maybe use a product, but then you think, oh, well, I think actually a bunch of beetles just flew in anyway. So I've heard growers talk about that when it comes to the nematode products in particular. So just bear in mind, it can be hard to tell. You're going to need to apply early before populations explode, targeting those young cucumber beetles, regardless of whatever insecticides you choose, if you choose any at all. And every product is different, so you really need to follow the label instructions carefully. Make sure you know which product is which and which safety precautions you need, and information about rates, the proper rate, proper placement. Um, you know, for instance, with the nematode products, it's really important to apply those as a soil drench. So applying them through drip irrigation is probably not going to be enough. Those products really need to be drenched in the soil. So again, you can just call your product supplier and ask them, hey, am I doing this right? Is there any way I can improve the use of this product? Because they're going to have more information for you. So for some tips, if you're going to use organic insecticides, just bear in mind, a lot of them might not be very effective on cucumber beetles, and there's an important difference here between lowering damage versus populations. So some organic products can reduce cucumber beetle damage, but maybe not actual population levels. This is a really helpful note from Ian Grettenberger and his lab. He's done a ton of research on cucumber beetles here in California. He's with UC Cooperative Extension as well at the statewide level, focusing on insect pests and vegetables. And organic options are a bit limited. We need more options. We need more options that work really well. But you could think about an attract and kill approach. So if you're going to use insecticides, you can think about maybe focusing on a specific area, like a small trap crop area, or really high risk, highly important areas. So there are ways that you can kind of fine tune and strategize around the use of these products. And as I mentioned earlier, systematic monitoring is absolutely key. So this is going to guide insecticide timing, and it's going to help you stay ahead of populations. So if you wait until you see that explosion, like I mentioned, it's too late. So, you want to set a relatively low action threshold that's appropriate for your specific farm, and this can look a little different depending on your farm, your products, your end buyers, your consumers, that kind of thing. So consider what other insect pests can be controlled by those products too. A lot of these organic insecticides actually can have some efficacy against other insect pests as well, since many of them are broad spectrum, meaning they don't specifically target a certain insect. And some products can be combined. And on the flip side, you can purchase products that actually contain multiple active ingredients too. So you can think about how you might want to mix and match. But again, always following label instructions. So if you want more information about pesticides, there's a bunch of educational resources on the UC IPM website. This is actually an incredible database of lots of different active ingredients. So if you're curious, you want to learn more about specific active ingredients that I've covered, you can look here. This does include organic and biologically based options as well. Also, I want to make sure everyone knows about the National Pesticide Information Center, so NPIC. This website has a lot of info on toxicity and safety and reducing risks. You can actually find a lot of product labeled online. So if you want, you can actually just find a lot of these labels with a Google search. If you want to learn more about them before you buy them, you can also talk to your supplier. And some suppliers have instructions and sort of like supplemental information that's, I think, really helpful on their websites as well. So I kind of mentioned this for a lot of these products, but I want to devote a slide to it briefly. So if you're going to use any kind of insecticide, organic or not, there are ways and strategies you can use to reduce off-target risks. So most organic insecticides are broad spectrum, meaning that they're not specific to just the target pest. So there are pros and cons to this. Maybe this is beneficial because it's going to help you control multiple insect pests. But the big con to this is that a lot of these products can really have detrimental effects on pollinators and beneficial insects. So you always want to follow the label instructions when it comes to the right rate, application timing, any personal protective equipment that you need to wear if you're going to apply a specific product, safety precautions, and so on. So I actually wrote another fact sheet when I was at Ohio State Extension in the pesticide safety education program. I co-authored this again with my mentor there for tips to protect pollinators while using pesticides. So again, you don't have to use pesticides, but if you do, there are actual strategies you can use to reduce risk to pollinators. There's also a lot of more educational resources on the UC IPM website as well. So like I mentioned earlier, pesticides are just one tool in your toolbox. You don't have to use them at all, but they're there, and it's important that you know that they exist and that if you choose to use them, you use them following the instructions really carefully to optimize efficacy and safety. So you want to integrate multiple other strategies first, though. So before you even consider that, you want to try a bunch of other things in combination and see if you can provide enough control before you get to that top of the triangle. And I just want to emphasize you can use IPM without pesticides. I think some folks think that IPM equals pesticides. It absolutely does not. As you can see here, there's tons of other strategies that you can use without pesticides. So IPM is the framework, and pesticides are just one tool in your toolbox that you could choose to use or not. So now I'm going to give you some examples of IPM for cucumber beetles on real farms in our region and throughout California. So thank you in advance to all the farmers who shared so many anecdotes, photos, tips. I really appreciate it. We have some great examples of what IPM can look like for this pest already. So Susanna at Front Porch Farm here in Sonoma County noticed that cucumber beetles were hanging out around weeds in the garlic under plastic mulch last month in January 2025. She sent me this photo, so thank you so much for the nice photo of cucumber beetle. So I talked with her a lot about this, and IPM strategies that she's planning on implementing this year includes, of course, scouting and documenting. So she's already doing that, so kudos for that. Removing that overwintering habitat through weeding and other methods around the farm. Monitoring populations with yellow sticky traps, possibly with pheromones. I think she's going to experiment with that and maybe compare. She said she's going to set some thresholds that are appropriate for their farm and their site. And she mentioned that she might try kaolin clay on transplants. So giving cucumber, summer squash, eggplant, kind of that nice protective barrier. Again, that's just clay and water, and it's pretty innocuous, but for bugs and for cucumber beetles, it's going to gum up their antenna and kind of disorient them. So this is an awesome example of a way that a farmer can combine multiple different IPM strategies, document what's going on, what they're seeing, and then kind of continually reevaluate and fine tune things. So not saying everyone needs to go out and do exactly what Susanna's doing, but this is just one example of how you can combine multiple strategies. And I want to emphasize scaling goals really matter. So, we have some farms here that are like half an acre or an acre, and then we have other farms that are really big. So commercial farm IPM often looks a bit different than backyard IPM as well due to different scales and goals. So like for those of you who might be backyard growers or non-commercial growers, or just at a really, really tiny scale, like maybe handpicking bugs off plants is helpful for you, but in most cases, it's not going to be practical at commercial scales. There's going to be maybe lower tolerance for blemishes if you're selling produce fresh versus if you're processing for like a value-added product. Potentially, you might have tolerance if you are creating a product that's going to be processed. Mid-scale farm IPM or large scale can look a lot different than small scale IPM due to those differences in scales, goals, constraints, equipment you might have or not have. So it's really important just to take a moment and think what works best for you at your scale and for your goals. And, in our region, we have so much diversity, we're going to have a lot of different answers, and that's totally normal. So it's great to compare notes with other farmers and ultimately to do what makes sense for you. There's no like one size fits all here. So the nice thing about IPM is it provides this toolbox of options for strategies that you can tailor for your unique situation. Okay, so I mentioned a lot throughout this presentation, we need more research on cucumber beetles. And the good news is I have a really cool example of some on-farm research on this pest from California. So just as another grower spotlight, I wanted to highlight Do Right Flower Farm's work. So this is Kelly Brown. This is shared with permission from them, and they successfully got a Western Sarah Farmer Rancher grant. You can see this project description for more details. If you want to take a deeper dive, it's online. Just to start off on the left-hand side, we have a strategy trap cropping. So Kelly says, sunflower trap crop adjacent to dahlias planted in succession for constant flowers while dahlias are flowering. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. They also mentioned pheromone lures, so putting these on that trap crop to increase desirability. And they use exclusions, so bug netting over the most attractive varieties, the white dahlias. This kind of might remind you of what Sonia said too about being pretty targeted and specific about where you use netting or row covers. And Kelly says to be mindful to choose a gauge of netting that is large enough to allow passage of natural predators like minute pirate bugs to avoid thrip outbreaks. So that is another really helpful tip just to bear in mind. And ultimately, Kelly's saying, you want to use a multi-pronged approach, not just rely on one strategy. So this is classic, really excellent example of integrating multiple strategies for effective IPM. Some more quick notes that Kelly mentioned. So you want to carefully consider timing of sowing the trap crops bloom so that the trap crop blooms before the cash crop needs protection. So I mentioned that earlier too. Just thinking about timing, making sure the cucumber beetles are going to go to that trap crop before they go to your actual cash crop. Kelly also mentioned that you could transplant instead of direct sow for guaranteed plants if soil temperatures and weather might not permit outside germination. I know this might be relevant for folks in our coastal climate. Kelly's also in a coastal climate in California. So yeah, that's another option is transplanting. And you might want to consider how this could cause other pest imbalances to the system. They mentioned thrips, really important to bear that in mind. You don't want to accidentally encourage a thrip outbreak if excluding their natural predators. So a lot of things to think about, but we have a lot of really talented farmers in California who are willing to share tips and strategies. So never hesitate to reach out to each other and compare notes. So here's some really nice, really excellent photos that Kelly shared, sort of demonstrating a lot of these things. So on the left, we've got a succession of sunflowers. And then you can kind of see on the right here, we've got dahlias. So you can see how Kelly has strategically timed planting of these different sunflower rows so that there's always going to be sunflowers blooming next to the really high value, high susceptibility white dahlia crop. And you can also see here, we've got a sunflower with a lure attached just for some extra help. And here's what it looks like when cucumber beetles have fed on the sunflower trap crop here on the left. Meanwhile, the white dahlias next to that trap crop look pretty great. But again, you do want to make sure you have some method to control those cucumber beetles, maybe insect vacuums, maybe other options. So you don't want cucumber beetle populations to build up too much on your trap crop. So I do want to mention, if you want to learn more about Kelly's work on this, you can see their Instagram account, Do Right Flower Farm. They have some really nice little graphics around ecological IPM, how they've done this work and sort of different tips and stuff like that. They also have a great website. So thank you, Kelly, for doing this research and for being willing to share what you're finding. So I want to emphasize that we really need more on-farm research on this subject. Farmers have a lot of great questions about this pest. There are a lot of unknowns still, and the needs of small and mid-scale diversified organic farmers sometimes look a bit different than large-scale conventional farms. On the other hand, sometimes there's things that we can learn from each other across scales as well. So generally, we do need more cucumber beetle research in annual crop systems, including non-cucurbit crop hosts like lettuce and flowers. So the good news is that I mentioned earlier, UC researcher Ian Grettenberger is doing cucumber beetle work. In their lab, they've done some work using floral lures that, they're somewhere on the market currently, and they can provide a degree of attraction, but not a ton. So Ian and his lab are doing research to assess floral lure attractants. And here's some research results that he shared. So thanks, Ian, for sharing this and doing this work. This is just one example of some UC research on this bug. So they found that the indole and pheromone and TIC, which is like a 3-component floral lure that is sold commercially, that plus the pheromone of the striped cucumber beetle Those combinations look promising, as you can see here in this graph. That's the green and pink bars. And on the y-axis, we've got average cucumber beetles caught per day. But they're not currently on the market yet. So, we need to look at new products, new options, strategies. It does take time to do this research, and hopefully in the future there will be some more options on the market that you can add to your toolbox. I also want to really highlight UC research done by Jasmine Ramirez-Strain. So she was in Ian's lab as a grad student and now actually works with UC Cooperative Extension. She's the Pesticide Safety Education Program lead. So really appreciative of all her work on cucumber beetles. She hosted one of the focus groups that I co-hosted. She did this really great presentation in Spanish on cucumber beetles. If you're interested, that's on my YouTube channel. And then Margaret Lloyd over in the Central Valley, Davis area. Margaret Lloyd is another UC Cooperative Extension advisor, and she works with a lot of small farmers and melon growers. So she hosted this research update from Jasmine. So if you want to take a deeper dive into that research that's been done on the ecology and a new aggregation pheromone for cucumber beetles, that's also on YouTube. So feel free to check that out. So I want to conclude by just saying it's really important to write your own IPM plan for this pest and for all of your pests that you have to deal with, and really tailor this to what you need on your farm. So, this starts with pest identification, making sure you've correctly identified what's causing the damage, preventing it as much as possible through different strategies that we cover, setting appropriate action thresholds, monitoring, record keeping, and then using lots of different strategies. And ultimately, you're going to repeatedly assess efficacy over and over time. This is a process that looks a little different each year. But at the very least, you want to make sure that your IPM plan includes systematic monitoring, whatever works best for you, but at least twice a week monitoring for this pest if you know it's a problem at your site. Appropriate thresholds to guide actions. So whatever makes sense for you, however much you can tolerate, combining multiple strategies for controlling cucumber beetle larvae early in the season. So again, regardless of what strategies you actually choose, you want to make sure that you control these guys early in the season. And you want to have strategies for controlling adult incoming cucumber beetles from nearby sites, because we know in our region that's another way that they move into fields. So you want to write your own plan. These are all of the strategies that I covered. They all have pros and cons, benefits, trade-offs. Some might be more important to you than others. And just to reiterate, I know this is a lot and you don't have to do all of these, so just choose the strategies that are appropriate for your situation. And remember that it's a process, every year is different. You're going to learn things over time. The more you can document and keep track of what you've learned, things you want to remember for next year, that's really important. So just bear in mind, this is a really challenging pest, and IPM is just an ongoing process. But you have lots of resources out there to support, including the UCCE IPM website. And for commercial veggie growers and flower farmers here in Sonoma, Marin and Napa Counties, please reach out to me at any point if you have questions. If you're outside of my region, please reach out to me anyway. I'm happy to connect you to advisors in your area. So yeah, thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and don't hesitate to reach out.